Hey, hey, hey. Lots going on this week, folks. We're going to get right to it. Hey, hey, welcome to Real Talk with Mochio. I'm your host, Gordon A. Mochio, the G-Man, they call me. Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone listening that the views, opinions, and statements expressed on Real Talk with Mochio are those of the host and guests of the podcast and do not necessarily reflect the views, opinions, or official positions of Gordon Vincent Associates, LLC, doing business as Mochio Media, or any of its subsidiaries, affiliates, or employees. And folks, as I do before embarking on any meaningful undertaking, I do thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for allowing me to spend some quality time with you this day. And folks, I truly, truly appreciate you listening in. Thank you very much. Okay, on with it. Folks, today's topics include the Department of Justice, DOJ, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, the Minnesota fraud scandal, and another potential powder keg just rolled down the street, and that is Ilhan Omar's financial disclosure. But folks, before we get into the meat and potatoes, I have a very, very special announcement. My latest book, Gridlock, Grid Down, is now available at the Amazon Kindle bookstore in hardcover format. Gridlock, Grid Down presents a very plausible scenario of what may occur if our nation's power grid was ever attacked. So check out this thriller. It's my first attempt at fiction. I hope you enjoy it. Again, Gridlock, Grid Down is available at the Amazon Kindle bookstore in ebook, paperback, and hardcover format. Give it a look-see. Okay, on to segment one, leadership, public confidence. Let's talk about why the calls for Attorney General Pam Bondi to step aside are getting louder. And these are not without merit. It's all about personality, folks. It's not about personality. Ha-ha. It's about performance. When you accept one of the most powerful law enforcement roles in the country, you do not get graded on intentions. You do not get graded on personality. You get graded on results. From day one, the message was bold. We were promised accountability, equal justice, and a reset at the DOJ. We were told the law applies to everyone. Yet, critics, including lawmakers and legal scholars, have accused Attorney General Pam Bondi of moving too slowly on certain investigations and on the issue of transparency. They cite public pressure from members of Congress, disputes over document production, internal DOJ policy changes that some argue have actually slowed the enforcement process. Now, folks, let me explain what I believe everyday Americans see when they're seated at the kitchen table, watching the news on their iPad or their television or talking with loved ones. Everyday Americans see delay after delay, reviews, allegations being thrown from both sides of the aisle, endless hearings, and what feels like an seemingly endless process. And there's no action. There's no decisive action, no clarity, no closure, no high-profile arrests being made. Folks, the DOJ cannot prosecute some people with speed and efficiency and hesitate when others are powerful, wealthy, or politically connected. That perception alone damages trust. Leadership at the DOJ requires setting clear priorities, placing results-oriented people in positions of authority, and following the facts and the money wherever it may lead or they may lead. Now, let's take a look at the recent ICE protests, shall we? There is no way that I believe that in this modern age of technology our government does not know who's funding or organizing these large-scale coordinated demonstrations. And folks, that's what they are. They're coordinated demonstrations often include paid agitators, paid demonstrators. And I mean, I see these 20, 30-second clips that the mainstream media runs, and I'm looking at all involved, and I'm saying, if I was on the job, I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to talk to her. I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to talk to her. Folks, why isn't this being done? I mean, you can clearly see people carrying bundles of signs, people handing out signs, people, what appears to me to be assigning people certain duties. I don't know. Maybe they are. Maybe we'll hear something down the road. But to me, they're dragging their feet on this issue. And what about our elected officials, especially those on the left, advocating for obstructing lawful enforcement actions by ICE? Now, folks, these actions should be examined carefully, lawfully, and without favoritism. And by God, if there's justification, these people should be hung up by their Buster Browns and charged. Enough of this stuff. Enough of this stuff. Okay, folks, before we continue, a word from our sponsor, Denise Mochio, your local Coldwell Banker Realtor. Visit Denise Mochio Realty at denisemochiorealty.com. That's DENISEMOCCIO Realty.com. Denise Mochio, your local Coldwell Banker Realtor, serving Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess counties. Okay, on to segment 2. Banking, scrutiny, and the old double standards. Folks, for this next segment, let's talk about Minnesota and the Minnesota fraud debacle, or debacle, whichever you prefer. But first, let's put it all into context, shall we? Every American listening, or most Americans listening, know how the system works. When you are not wealthy, high profile, or politically connected, sorry, the usual rules don't apply to you. You have to obey a different set of guidelines. If you deposit or withdraw too much cash, you're flagged. You move money between accounts, you're flagged. You make a transaction that doesn't fit the normal pattern, you're flagged and scrutinized. Now, folks, banks are legally required to report unusual activity. I'll give them that. What they don't get to do is look the other way under certain circumstances, or who's involved, or can they, or do they? Here's a scenario. A high-profile citizen gets elected into public service and reports minimal assets, and at the next cycle shows a dramatic increase in household wealth. Now, based on recent history, what happens? Very little, unless a whistleblower comes forward or information is leaked that gets the media's attention. Then that's a different story. Now, compare that to what may happen to you if you're in that situation. Reports would be filed, anti-money laundering systems would be activated, accounts would be reviewed, income streams questioned, accounts may be frozen, and in some cases, criminal charges may follow. And that's going to happen in lickety-split, folks. Why? You know why. That's how the system treats everyone else. So, why does scrutiny appear to stop at the top? It's that old double standard that's plagued us forever. Here's the real damage, folks. Perceived selective enforcement erodes faith in institutions faster than any speech or protest ever could. When Americans believe accountability is selective, justice is optional, and enforcement depends on who you are, you don't get unity. You get resentment, distrust, disengagement, anger. Folks, this is dangerous territory for any republic. Now, before we move on to the next segment, let me take a moment to tell you about another book, The Price of Deception, a guide to reducing workers' compensation fraud, now available in ebook and paperback at the Amazon Kindle bookstore. It's real-world insight drawn from over 2 decades in law enforcement, public safety, and risk management experience, folks. Workers' compensation fraud doesn't just cost money. It raises premiums, drains public resources, and hurts honest workers and employers alike. In this book, I break down how to investigate claims from a law enforcement perspective. I sort of make you a workers' compensation investigator super sleuth, if you will. It explains how fraud actually occurs, why traditional controls fail, and provides practical, proven strategies organizations can use to detect, prevent, and reduce workers' compensation fraud. Now, if you're an employer, municipal official, risk manager, or simply someone who cares about accountability, this book is for you. The Price of Deception is available now on Amazon Kindle, at the Amazon Kindle bookstore, in ebook and paperback, because when fraud goes unchecked, ladies and gentlemen, everyone pays the price. Okay, on to segment 3, Minnesota fraud scandal. Let's talk about Minnesota. One of the largest COVID-era fraud schemes in American history didn't just happen in secret. It happened in plain sight with taxpayer dollars. Federal court findings show that hundreds of millions of dollars intended to feed the children were diverted through shell nonprofits, fake vendors, and fabricated meal counts. Luxury cars, real estate, designer goods. These people went to town and bought everything except food for the children. Folks, this is an opinion. This is documented fact. And let's be absolutely clear. This is not an indictment of Somali Americans. The overwhelming majority are law-abiding, hard-working citizens. This is about criminal networks, folks, plain and simple. Criminal networks and institutional failure. Warnings were raised, auditors flagged problems. State employees sounded alarms, and yet funding continued. Oversight was non-existent. Let's just say internal controls took a holiday. Why? Staffers' concerns continued to be ignored. Folks, this is no way to run a business. And when the proverbial cat was let out of the bag, the response was typical. Delay, deflect, and deny until they can't deny anymore. Court records and state audits show that Minnesota officials were warned about fraud risks while Governor Walz was in office. Yet the program continued to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars. Now that raises some serious questions about leadership and accountability. Now on to segment 4, disclosures and double standards. Now, let's take a look at Ilhan Omar, a Somali-born naturalized American and federal lawmaker from Minnesota. When she entered public office, she reported minimal assets. In fact, early filings listed no reportable assets. Later, public disclosures reflect household assets reported in between $6 and $30 million. Now, I know that's a broad range, folks, but keep in mind, this was consistent with the requirements of Congress and the way their reporting system is structured. But apparently, this spike in wealth is largely due to spousal business valuations. And it's important to remember that these are not audited net worth statements. Let me be clear. I am not accusing anyone of a crime. I'm pointing to publicly available disclosures and asking why the standards of scrutiny appear vastly different for powerful individuals or high-profile individuals than for ordinary citizens. Imagine if you or I experienced that kind of financial change. Bells and whistles would sound, reports would be filed, questions would be raised, accusations would be made. It would be a totally different game if it were you or me. Oh, and here's the latest, if not the greatest. Let me address a claim that's been circulating, and I got to do this carefully because accuracy matters. Public financial disclosures show that Ilhan Omar listed an interest in a California company described as a winery. Now, this winery is valued at somewhere between $1 and $5 million. Now, that's straight from the disclosure, folks. Those filings, when attempted to be verified, well, we're all familiar with Carl Higbie, commentator, right? Well, Carl Higbie, speaking as a commentator, has publicly claimed that when his team examined the listed winery, the address appeared to be a parking lot. There was no visible public winery operation. The website did not appear to sell wine. And the site recently went offline. Poof! Gone. With no visible trail. Let me be very clear. These claims are made by a media commentator. There is no official determination of wrongdoing, and I am not accusing anyone of a crime. But here's a fair question. When multi-million-dollar assets are disclosed by public officials and independent observers raise basic questions, why doesn't transparency immediately follow? Because trust isn't built by dismissing questions. Trust is built by answering questions. So, in Representative Omar's case, what happened to the detention mechanisms already in place with the banking systems? No bells and whistles went off? There had to be some sort of financial transactions from account to account. I don't know, folks. Yeah, you tell me. Now, this may cause some to believe that the system is rigged. And who knows? They may be right. When Americans see intense scrutiny at the bottom and minimal security at the top, they don't see fairness. They see a double standard. Folks, this isn't about ideology, isn't about party. If financial disclosure laws matter, they must matter for everyone. If banking oversight protects the system, it must be applied evenly. And if the DOJ wants the public trust, scrutiny cannot stop where power begins. Same rules, same scrutiny, same expectations. Anything less is injustice, folks. It's bowing to privilege. Folks, this episode has been brought to you by Denise Mochio, your local Coldwell Banker Realtor. Visit Denise at denisemocciorealty.com. That's DENISEMOCCIO Realty.com. Serving Westchester, Putnam, and Dutchess counties. Until next time, my friends, may the blessings of heaven rest upon you and yours. Until we meet again.